This is Away, Series 2, a podcast for anyone interested in a fresh approach to 12-step recovery. I'm your host, Steph Roberts. It's episode 7. Hello, everybody. It is 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and we just got finished watching the final episode of I Am the Night, which I really loved as a series. Really, really loved. I thought it was beautiful, and I thought the acting was great, and yeah, I just loved it from start to finish. I am running a hot bath. I work out every day, but tomorrow is my rest day, so I'm going to enjoy staying up a little later and relaxing. But that's not what you're here to listen to. So let's jump right into the second part of There Is a Solution. My favorite title in the whole book. Not necessarily my favorite chapter, though I like it. So, page 26. Let's read. A certain American businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. For years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrists. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of a celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Jung, who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So he returned to this doctor whom he admired and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent it does in you." Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. Let's pause for 1 second and remember the description of the real alcoholic. This is the description of the real alcoholic. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times, here and there, once in a while. Alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begins to dominate them. In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods which I employ are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description." Okay, oh my God, dear listener. I am very excited because you already know so much. This is the beginning of the story of AA, predating Bill and Bob. Who's the businessman? Roland Hazard. Now, There is some debate on the minutiae of the story, the exact dates, etc., but for our purposes, that's mostly irrelevant. This is the point at which you'll hear people in a big book study, for instance, begin to talk about 3 major themes, and they will, and the book will, bring them up over and over again. Oh, Umi, Uma, come here. One, self-knowledge is not enough to stay sober. 2, a spiritual experience is fundamental to long-term sobriety. And 3, the concept of synchronicity. Remember, Roland is an alcoholic looking for help from a psychiatrist. He ends up seeing Jung. Jung was the most mystical of the shrinks, especially for a man of science, and thought that the only quote-unquote cure for real alcoholism was a vital spiritual experience, which he also calls a huge emotional displacement and rearrangement. Hold on to that wording. We're actually going to ignore the asterisk that tells us to read Appendix 2 for amplification of the spiritual experience, but you decide if you want to read it. I find it mostly useless at this point. Okay, so why does this story bring up self-knowledge? There's a line coming up on page 39 you've probably heard before, quote, "The actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge." This is the point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. All right. So this story is the beginning of that idea, or is meant to guide us towards that belief. It's setting us up for that. The point here is that self-knowledge alone is not enough. I mean, I think that's debatable. That's the experience of these guys. I actually know people who have recovered from addiction using therapy. But I am one of the people for whom therapy alone did not work. So, let's say instead, for some of us, the knowledge that we are alcoholics is not enough to stay sober. It may be enough to abstain for a while, but for long-term success, we need more. This leads right into the notion that a spiritual experience is necessary for people like me, people for whom self-knowledge is not enough, people who seem hopeless in the face of their addiction. Keep it as it is and think of spiritual not as otherworldly, but as cerebral or intellectual. Or, let's start by completely removing vital spiritual experiences and phenomena. And instead, let's say, yes, exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what appears to be a huge emotional displacement and rearrangement. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begins to dominate. Firstly, of course, this all assumes that these are exact quotations from Jung, and I tend to doubt that. But anyway, this is exactly what we talked about in the last episode. Cognitive behavioral therapy, when used consistently, does just this. So in the end, whatever you believe, you're going to have to take action to change the way you think about certain things. As an aside, it really pisses me off when people in AA say, "You think you know it all, but your best thinking got you here." Huh? They're not implying I made an awesome choice. They're implying that my best thinking kept me an alcoholic who hit a bottom so low she needed AA. It's fucked up and it's wrong. And it's kind of dumb. Take the sarcasm out of it and you have an empowering truth. Because I am really fucking smart. I understood, even through the haze of booze, that I needed help. And I sought it in AA. I'm referring to all this because you can trust yourself. All right, back on track. No matter what you believe or what you know already, changing a pattern or habit requires you to do some stuff. In the very beginning, as we've said before, the action you're taking is abstaining. That's it. 1 day at a time, 1 hour at a time, you're abstaining. And no matter what you believe or what you know, that's going to require some willpower. Because even if you've got capital G God, there's a chance you'll have to grit your teeth while you pray. There is no magical elixir for anyone. There is no elevator to success. You gotta take the stairs, 1 step at a time. See what I did there? Oh, how do I keep getting way off track? Okay, this whole emotional rearrangement idea is a lot simpler than the ridiculous way in which it's written in the book. To be fair, it must have seemed a lot less ridiculous in 1939 because a lot of people loved it, including journalists like Jack Alexander, who published a glowing piece about the institution on March 1st of 1941 in the Saturday Evening Post. It is a fantastic cover, by the way, so worth taking a look at. I love it. But really, all they're really saying here is change the way you think. And I'm saying in the early days of sobriety, just change the way you think about alcohol. This is not a passive activity. This means, for example, every time the desire to drink pops up in your head, every time you think, oh, wouldn't a glass of wine be lovely right now? You then immediately smack it down with the facts. For example, I might say to myself, self, alcohol's not an elixir, it's a poison. Or I might use the think it through trick, wherein I remind myself that 1 glass of wine was never a thing. So if I have 1 glass, that means I'll have 2. Then I'll finish the bottle. Maybe I'll start another bottle, finish it too. If I stay home, I'll drink until I pass out. But because alcohol usually makes me manic, it's unlikely that I'll stay home, especially since my social anxiety has now been alleviated by the disinhibitor, and I feel more normal, really. And even though I have work tomorrow, I'll go out. I'll probably seek out friends who are also drinking. Maybe they'll have cocaine. If they do, I'll join them in doing it. Probably end up closing the bar, or maybe end up hosting an all-nighter at my place. Then I'll either call into work sick or I'll go in basically unable to function. Either way, I'll spend most of the day feeling terrible, physically and emotionally. So yeah, that's what a lovely glass of wine at the end of the day actually looked like for me. So the more often we smack down the lies our most base brain is feeding us with the truth, the easier it gets. And AA is helpful to people like me for whom self-knowledge alone was not enough. Because I don't have to do the smackdown alone. I can go to a meeting, which will remind me, or keep it green, as they say. I can call my sponsor or other sober friend and ask for the reminder. Hey, Pal, could you remind me why this is worth it? And together we can skip down nightmare lane, right? So to begin on this journey to sobriety, you're just changing the way you think about one thing. You can worry about changing other stuff later. One small, achievable goal at a time. That's the path to success. And as for the later stuff, you will find things you want to change. Not everything. And in part, the steps will help you to identify those things. The process is really a pretty basic process of therapy. And when it's done right and with the right support, it will also help you identify the good shit. Because honestly, unless you're a psychopath or a sociopath, you've probably got a lot of valuable things to contribute to the world. Ignore the people who say you don't. And if you don't believe me now, just choose to trust me for now. You'll see. I promise. Anyway, yeah. So we'll change the way we think about some stuff, and we'll change it little by little. The first and most important overhaul is the way you think about booze. I also want to emphasize here how important it is to be proud of yourself for every change, for every smackdown. God or not, it's still you making it through the hard times. No matter what or who is helping you, it's still you doing the work. Not God, not a sponsor, you. Take a minute right now to be proud of yourself. Whether you're counting days or you've just set a new goal, take a minute. Oh my God, if I spend this long on every paragraph, we'll be doing this for years. So let's hop ahead now to page 28, bottom of the page. We think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. This should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in the light of past associations or his present choice. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. That's a lot less true today. Most of us don't necessarily. It also depends very much on where you live. I mean, certainly in New York City, there's many fewer people who prefer such memberships than there is in rural Alabama or Big Sky country. Oh, I love it. Willa Cather. Anyway, I read this paragraph because it's just a good reminder. Bill writes much more about this in later writings, which we will also explore as we move forward. But be sure to keep this in your back pocket when you feel attacked by a Bible thumper or Jesus freak. Quote that shit. All right, page 29. Further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. Okay, so by that they mean the steps in the chapter How It Works. More on that later. But keep in mind, directions and requirements are not synonymous. Directions and guidelines are. This is where it's at, last paragraph of the chapter. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women desperately in need will see these pages, and we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing. This thing is contented sobriety. They're saying by being open, honest, willing, they're hoping to reassure you that you're not alone and that there is a solution, one that worked for them and might also work for you. Keep an open mind. Yay. Okay, now on to more about alcoholism. Chapter 3. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it to the gates of insanity or death. The first paragraph I actually think is very relatable for a lot of people to this day, and I include myself to a degree. Hindsight may have made this clearer. But I wasn't unwilling to admit I had a problem. I made jokes about it. And I'd always known I was different in this way and many others. I'd felt different from everyone around me from a very young age. That said, I was unwilling to admit I was a quote-unquote real alcoholic. I believed I could quit any time with relative ease. And sometimes with a few friends, I would do things like dry January. In some ways, I think because I was a binge drinker, it wasn't terribly hard to stop drinking for a week, even 2. But in order to stay quit, I honestly would have had to become a hermit. Is that even still an acceptable word? Because making it through the world without the only medicine that alleviated my anxiety and discomfort in social situations simply wasn't possible, or so I thought. And the thing the writers don't make immediately clear here, although I would argue that they do as the book progresses, is that, you can stay sober or dry or whatever, but without help, without support, in whatever form that comes, it can be really hard, even unbearable. White-knuckling your way through life is just not fun. Certainly no better than being a hermit. My cat Ben wants to leave the room. He's going to want to come right back in. Okay, so this leads right into step 1, second paragraph. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people or presently may be has to be smashed. Straightforward, right? We can no longer lie to ourselves. We have to admit that our response to alcohol is not the same as quote-unquote normal drinkers. That to take a drink for us is to get drunk. There's very little gray area. Quote, we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. I don't know that for sure. The evidence for this remains to this day anecdotal. I think, however, that the best thing to do is just believe it, period. Of course, if you want to do more research and they say this, go ahead. They say, and I agree, you probably aren't going to make it a year without drinking, without help. But if you're reading this book or listening to this podcast, chances are you're not someone who can control her drinking. Or maybe you think you can. Maybe you can. But think about this. If you go out to dinner with friends and you promise yourself you'll have no more than 2 drinks and then you'll go home, what happens after those 2 drinks? Even if you don't have a third, how is your mindset? Are you focused on your friends, enjoying the conversation, or are you looking at their drinks, obsessing about the half-full bottle of wine that no one is drinking? Maybe you're making a deal with yourself. 3 would be fine. Let's say you were in the present and fully enjoying dinner even without more than 2 drinks. What about en route home? How much willpower do you have to exert not to stop at the liquor store or a local bar for a quick drink? Has the end of the evening been as pleasurable as the beginning? This was a great tool for me in early sobriety. Not as good as Think It Through, but Think It Through works best after you've fully conceded. This tool, I think, helps a lot as you think about step one, especially if you're struggling at all with it. Toward the bottom of page 31 is a paragraph people tend to love because it summarizes a lot of the tricks we've used in order to avoid admitting we were real alcoholics. Of course, some of this too seems a little antiquated. A quick review of the silliness they cover: we tried not drinking hard liquor, limiting the number of drinks, only drinking socially, only drinking at home, never drinking in the morning, never keeping booze in the house, never drinking at lunch, changing up the type of alcohol you drink because gin is the problem, not whiskey. That was one of my favorites. Anyway, very relatable. So on page 32, we meet the man of 30 who quits drinking for a long time when he sees it's becoming a detriment to his success. But as soon as he picked it up again 25 years later, he picked up right where he left off and got much worse very quickly. Most AA historians believe this man, this allegory, is a man named Richard Peabody. He wrote a book called The Common Sense of Drinking, in which the first chapter, aptly named First Steps, is quite similar to this story. The writers of the big book changed the story enough that no one is 100% certain. But the point they are trying to drive home is clear. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Or, as the very annoying slogan goes, you can't unpickle a pickle or a cucumber. You can't unpickle a pickle. Whatever. Again, I really don't know the answer. But my feeling, my opinion, why try? Why? I mean, if life was so good drinking, why stop? So if life with drinking is not good and you want to stop, and people like me are promising you that you can stop and can be happy, why start again? In my experience, staying stopped is a lot easier than stopping and starting and stopping and starting or trying to moderate. In the end, it really requires less willpower, less discipline. You hear some people say, and this used to annoy me so much, even if they came up with a pill that would make me into a normal drinker, I would never drink again. AA is everything I need. I used to think bullshit. But now I kind of am like, oh my God, I really never want to even feel tipsy again. I never miss it. I really don't. And I really don't think I'd take a drink, even if there was a cure. But then again, I think maybe I'm already taking it. Maybe I'm finally on the right medications, in my case, Lamictal and Zoloft. And that's precisely why I have literally no desire, nothing to medicate with the right medication, or nothing else to medicate. The argument is still, why try again? Why take the risk? Even if the risk is minuscule, why take it? On page 33, I want to highlight this for young people or for people who maybe didn't start drinking heavily until later in life. Quote, young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think that they can stop as he did on their own willpower. We doubt if many of them can do it, because none will really want to stop, and hardly one of them, because of the peculiar mental twist, already acquired will find he can win out. Several of our crowd, men of 30 or less, had been drinking only a few years, but they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. I'm highlighting this because someday, somewhere, some asshole may say to you, "You're not a real drunk, you only drank for 2 years." And that asshole may be in AA or maybe a member of your family. Just don't listen. It's got nothing to do with the number of years you drank or used or how many drinks it took to get drunk. Remember that. All right, page 34. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether, assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he's already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, this utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or wish. Like, I had a big work event the next day, and it still wouldn't hold me back, especially if I took a drink. So here, while they're emphasizing the spiritual solution, they're also emphasizing step 1, right? Depends upon the extent to which he has already lost power. So let's focus on that rather than what they see as the only solution. The writers continually insist that spirituality and theism are one and the same, and they're not. You wouldn't say that a Buddhist isn't spiritual, and Buddhists are not theists or polytheists. Leaving aside that continual push, not much else can or will happen if you don't admit that you're not someone who can ever drink safely, who can ever have just one drink. Okay, not even I can take much more of this now. In the next episode, we'll finish this chapter. It's a long, bloody chapter, so it may be that episode 8 is entirely dedicated to it. Whatever. Until then, my darlings, I hope this helped, and please remember that no matter what, there is